What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. After a few weeks of a pretty mediocre waiver wire, I'd actually call this one an above average week, especially if you need help at running back. Wide receiver options, streaming options, not that great this week, but we got 14 running backs we're going to go over in today's video, and some of them are available in like 98, 99% of leagues, so everyone will have someone to talk about here. So let's start off with those running back, and we're going to go in order roughly of how much interest I have in them. I still haven't done the full rest of season rankings yet, but this is a pretty good indication of the order I would like claim them in this week. So number one, Tank Bigsby. ETN is week to week with the hamstring injury. Had ETN not been expected to miss time, I would drop Tank in these rankings because it is somewhat concerning that he didn't play that much this week. Like ETN missed basically the entire second half of the game, didn't play all that much, but it was actually D'Ernest Johnson out snapping Tank Bigsby 35-17. Now they lost by 21 and Bigsby had the fumble. He didn't lose it, but he fumbled the football, and sometimes coaches are weird about that. Maybe that could be kind of playing into it. Also, again, losing by 21, it could just be the case where they viewed Ernest more as a passing down back. They knew they were going to throw it every play. Maybe that's the case. They're home versus the Patriots this week, so if there was ever a spot where they are a little bit more likely to win, again, they're not a good team, but if they're more likely to win, it would potentially be this week. So I think he's someone to go after because if Etienne's going to miss time, Bigsby's going to be a running back too, and there's not that many times where you can add someone in free agency who's going to be running back too in the next week. Then you have Tyrone Tracy Jr. I mean, we talked about him last week. He was great last week. We were like, okay, if he's going to get this starting role again, we're just like starting him in fantasy every time that happens. Another really good game this week. I don't know. Like, I genuinely have no idea what's going to happen once Singletary returns. My guess is they'll obviously not start Eric Ray. Like, he won't be out there. They'll probably rotate through Tracy and Singletary and just kind of ride the hot hand. But there is also a chance that they're like, listen, Tracy's been great. Singletary's fine, but let's just keep riding this kid, and maybe he stays the starter when Singletary returns. And who also knows, like, it seems like Singletary's close to returning, but maybe he misses another game. And so I think regardless, you should have had him last week. If you haven't, Tyrone Tracy Jr., great player to go after on free agency, because there is that chance that like he just wins the starting job. And even though the Giants aren't a good team, that would still be a very valuable role in fantasy. Ty Chandler won't be, even if Aaron Jones were to miss this game. Remember, Jones had like the hip injury 2 weeks ago, then they go on bye last week. So he's had time to recover. If Jones misses, we're starting Chandler in fantasy as a strong play as a running back too, but he's not going to be as featured as Aaron Jones. He's not as good as Aaron Jones. So it's not a 1-for-1, but it's maybe like an 80% Aaron Jones, which again would still be a running back too. And their schedule coming up, difficult matchup, home versus the Lions, but at least it would be a high scoring game. So you would say, okay, maybe the touchdown potential is there, maybe potential to be used a lot in the receiving game. But then it's like at the Rams versus the Colts, at the Jaguars. So again, I don't know how much time Jones is missing, but they're going to probably average 30 points per game over the next month, maybe even more. And so if that's going to happen, and if there's a chance even that Jones misses time, you're going to be wanting the starting running back on a team averaging 30 points per game. Tyler Allgeier after that. It was against the Panthers this week. So don't ever get too excited. Like whenever someone has a good game, an offense looks good against the Panthers, understand that it's the Panthers. Everyone runs on them. Everyone scores rushing touchdowns. So it wasn't like shocking that he had a great game, but he also closed the game over Bijan. He had 18 carries for 105 yards and a touchdown. He's going to have standalone value in games that we really expect him to win. There's not a ton of games where we're like, oh, the Falcons are definitely going to win this game. It's actually going to be very rare where they're definitely going to be winning. But if you needed someone who not only has significant upside, he's running back one if Bijan got hurt, but someone who also occasionally does have standalone value, Allgeier would be your guy on free agency. Ray Davis last night looked fantastic. I have no clue. I don't think anyone knows really how long Cook is going to be out. You would think it's a shorter term injury because going into Monday, I would say the indication was that Cook was going to play. Like the expectation was that he was going to be out there. Then he's inactive. We kind of started hearing reports on Monday where it was like, yeah, maybe he's actually not going to play. But if it kind of got to that point, even if they kind of knew throughout the week, you would think it's not going to be super long-term injury. They didn't put him on IR, so they're not expecting 4 games missed. So I think Cook could return next week, could return the week after that. And I do think this is a situation where I don't think Ray Davis just earned the starting role. Cook's also been very, very good. So I think Cook is still the starter, but you still have a situation where Cook could still miss time. They leaned on Ray Davis for 23 touches. That could happen again. They play at Pittsburgh the next week. That's not great. At New England, that's a very, very winnable game versus the Texans, and then at the Cardinals. So kind of like a mixture of matchups there. Not a ton of spots. We're expecting Buffalo to get up big, but they didn't get up big this week, and they still leaned on him. And again, he looked very, very good. So Ray Davis, definitely someone to go after. Kimani Vidal, everyone's favorite sleeper. He has a quote unquote good game, really just because of one play. He had that long receiving touchdown. Other than that, he was out snapped by Dobbins 57-19, out touched 27-6. He averaged 2.75 yards per carry. So a pretty bad game overall, but again, he has the one receiving touchdown. People pumped about that. But obvious upside. So even if we say, he wasn't that great on the ground, it was on 5 carries. You can't really judge him based on that. The upside is just that this is the Chargers. The Chargers have a great rushing offense, a great offensive line. He is a prospect that people are excited about for a reason. He is actually a decent player. And then, you've already got Gus on IR. Dobbins is a walking injury, so that could absolutely happen where he misses time. And so now if we think, okay, he's the backup to Dobbins, obviously worth stashing just in case there's an injury, but you, of course, can't play him unless there is the injury. Don't go crazy. I could see some people going out there and putting 25-30% of the fab on him just because they're so excited about Vidal, because he was someone that everyone talked about over the summer. But again, he's very firmly the backup running back, so you're treating him similarly to a lot of these other running backs, where it's if they are firmly the backup, no real value while they're the backup, it's an upside case, but you can't spend 30% of your fab on an upside case. Jaylen Wright, another option. He's always been an exciting prospect. It's just really been about the touches, right? He was healthy and active to start the season. Same thing as Achane last season. So it's that's not really a knock on him. That's just kind of what they do in Miami with some of these rookies. Starts to get more playing time, starts becoming the backup. And then we have these injuries, right? We had Mostert miss time. We had Achane leave their game 2 weeks ago because they went on bye this last week. So 2 weeks ago, left the game with concussion. Don't know. We had Neighbors miss 2 games with a concussion. We'll see if he can come back. Concussions are just case by case. We don't know what's going to happen. But a lot of people do return after 1 game. So definitely a chance that Achane returns this week. He plays. Definitely a chance that they view Jaylen Wright still as the number 3, and we get Achane and Mostert getting most of the touches, Wright playing for a few touches. But that's one outcome, right? There's another outcome where maybe he's past Raheem Mostert. There's another outcome where maybe Achane does miss another week. And it doesn't matter that he hasn't passed Mostert because he can still play as that number 2 running back, still getting a ton of touches if Achane is out. So a lot of different outcomes. Again, we don't really know, but because of the upside, of Tua could return, is expected to return in week 8. That's only 1 week away. So this offense could really be turning around. If there's even a chance that Jaylen Wright is a starting running back for any point when Tua is also active, he needs to be rostered in all leagues because he would be a must start in those games. Trey Benson, we're starting to get into the much lower confidence ones. And for the rest of these, it also depends, number one, on your take. How do you feel about these players? How do you feel about the situation for these players? How do you feel about the chances they kind of become starters, get a lot of touches? But then also what you think the upside is, right? We're going to talk about someone in a second after this that I don't really think there's really much of an upside case, but there's more of a floor case. So what do you need, right? Do you need someone who's going to get you 7-8 touches because you want someone to kind of fill in for buys and injuries you have coming up? Or do you want someone who's not really getting any touches, but has the upside to eventually get touches? So it's really just dependent on what you want on the bench. Benson is kind of that second case, right? James Conner was kind of banged up last week. He also lost a fumble. The game was over in the 4th quarter, so he didn't really play much. And it's not like Benson had some great game. He had 5 carries. But I think people are starting to get excited because it's Conner's not as good as he was last season. Conner's always hurt. He always misses time with injury. Didn't this last game, but it's he was kind of banged up. We can see him missing time in the future. Benson was a very exciting prospect. It's a good offense. And so if you had Benson become the starter in the second half of the season, he would have definite fantasy value. So you can see the case there. But again, Benson is not someone you could ever rely on while Conner is healthy and the starting running back, which is still the case as of right now. Antonio Gibson, after that, again, this is the floor case. He has touch counts of 7, 12, 8, 9, 7, and 16 this last week. Of course, the 16 spike with the Stevenson injury, which they've come out and said it's not expected to be long-term. Didn't go on IR. He could come back this next week, but my guess is maybe he misses one more game and he returns in week 8. I don't think you really need to go after Antonio Gibson, but it's that floor case, right? Do you have buys this week? Do you have guys that are injured? And you're like, Nick, I will take 10 touches at running back and be perfectly happy with that at running back too, just to get something. Well, then, yeah, you'd go with Gibson over someone like Trey Benson, who's probably going to have like 4 carries for 20 yards and maybe no reception. So depends what you need. He's an option there. No real path to running back 1 production, but if we had another game where Stevenson missed, Gibson wasn't good, but he's better than he showed this last week. Sean Tucker, an upside case. He looked fantastic on Sunday. He was an elite prospect. Like before remember last season we talked about him and they had the heart condition, right? So teams were excited about him, but then it comes out he has this heart condition. A lot of teams cross him off for medical reasons. They're like, we just can't draft him. But then a ton of teams reached out to him in the free agency period because they're like, well, we still want to get you on the team. We just maybe don't want to spend a draft pick to do it. Ends up going to the Bucks. Ends up not really doing anything last season. I don't know if that had anything to do with like not being able to train as much because of the condition, like leading up to the season. But they were basically saying like he wasn't as explosive last season. They couldn't really get him on the field, which is a little bit embarrassing when you had like the backup running backs they had last season. We talked about last season though, saying, okay, Rachaad White's a smash, unless they really view Sean Tucker highly because he is someone who could break out as a prospect. Turns out, kind of reading things, it was like not really happening, wasn't really breaking out last season, so we go all in on Rachaad White. This season, it was like, okay, well, Bucky Irving's a huge threat, so we can't go all in on Rachaad White anymore. But you still have Sean Tucker there, and he's always been a threat if he can break out. He looked explosive. He looked awesome. He looked like a player that needs touches. I mean, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns on 15 touches. Again, looks incredibly explosive. Looks like the prospect people thought he could be last season in that pre-draft process before we had these reports of the heart condition. So, what do they do? I don't know. I mean, I genuinely have no idea what the Bucs are going to do here, right? You can't keep feeding Rachaad White touches when he's hyperly inefficient. At this point, the 3rd best early down running back on the team. He's the best receiving back. But when you look at it and you're like, well, we could use Bucky, we could use Tucker, we can use these 2 running backs perfectly fine in the receiving game. I don't know what they're going to do. Do they trade Rachaad White? I'm sure Dallas would go after him, right? I'm sure maybe KC would give you something for him. There's got to be teams that'll give you something. It's just, do you care about that something, or would you rather just go through running back rotation? I don't know. So I think he's worth going after because he nearly had 200 total yards and 2 touchdowns on 15 touches. Anyone who does that is worth going after, especially when they're a young, athletic prospect on a pretty decent team. It's just that there's so much variance here that I really don't know what the outcome is going to be. But again, worth going after. Isaac Guerendo, no guarantee that Jordan Mason misses any sort of time, but it's absolutely possible. Also, I just think people are going to go after Isaac a little bit too aggressively. I fully understand the case of being like, well, if Mason, because I do kind of think Mason misses 1 game. We know McCaffrey's not back yet. He's like a month out. We know that they're fully fine going with a featured running back, right? And giving someone 20 touches. My problem is that for most of the game, he wasn't good. Like, he did open as a starter. Then he wasn't playing well until they kind of benched him. Then they bring him back in for that final drive, and he busts off the 1 long play. Now, it was that 1 long play that kind of solidified things and being like, this is what we knew. We knew that he wasn't some incredible running back prospect from like a vision standpoint, from like, a consistency standpoint. We just knew that he was hyperly athletic. Like, he is an unbelievably athletic running back. And it was like, put him on the San Fran offense and good things will probably happen. He'll probably run for a bunch of 1 and 2 yard runs, but then he'll bust off an 80-yard touchdown. Like, that's just kind of the player that he is. Tough match. I mean, this week he plays Kansas City. That's like the worst running back matchup you can have. But then next week against Dallas, it's versus Dallas, at home versus Dallas. That's like the best spot you can possibly be in right now for running back. So variance here, right? If you had a crystal ball and you knew that Mason was going to miss 2 weeks, you're absolutely adding Isaac Guerendo just for that upside, in week 8. But if you knew that Mason was going to return for week 8, it's like, well, I mean, I probably don't even want to play Isaac Guerendo against KC. So it's up to you what you do, how many bench spots you have, what's your league size. Like, if this is the first running back, I mean, it'd be weird if Sean Tucker was rostered too. But if this is like the first running back that's even available for you and you need a stash, oh, definitely. Like, definitely go after him. But if, like, you know, half the running backs we've talked about already are also options, it's like, do you really need to go after him? Because you know, like, you don't know that McCaffrey's going to come back, but he's expected to come back in a month. We're expecting Jordan Mason to come back relatively soon. So this is not a long-term play. He will be on free agency in 5 weeks. Like, I can almost guarantee that Guerendo will be on free agency in 5 weeks for, like, fantasy. But again, if you need someone short-term, he could be an option. Alexander Mattison, he's just not a good running back. Like, he's just not good, but he has 17 and 19 touches over the last 2 weeks. If Zamir is still going to be out for another game, you could definitely start him. Also, kind of game script proof. I mean, they got blown out in the last 2 weeks, 17, 19 touches. It seems like he'd be the early down back anyways, so he'd still get touches if they were winning. They played the Rams this week. So, again, if Zamir's out, he could be streamed, but he's just not a good running back, so I really hate streaming these terrible running backs. Keaton Mitchell doesn't have short-term value. I don't even know if Keaton Mitchell is going to play this season, but if he does play, it's probably not going to be in the next couple of weeks. But if you're looking for a long-term stash, maybe crossing our fingers it does not happen, of course. We love Derrick Henry. A ton of you have him. If Derrick Henry were to get injured, like the fantasy playoffs, and you had Keaton Mitchell as the backup, he could be someone who gets 10 to 12 touches every week, and he would have upside to be like a low-end running back too in those games. But again, that's a longer-term stash. And then Clyde, he could literally not play again this season, but he could also return this week. It's a very low-confidence pick, but in a super deep league, there's a world where they let him compete with Hunt for that starting job. And Hunt's, like, he's shown well, but he's not a good running back at this point in his career. There's a world where Clyde goes out there, has some pretty good games. I think that's worth taking a shot on if you're in like a 14 or 16 team league, if you've got really deep benches and he is one of the top players available. So that's running back. That is most of free agency. That is like probably what you're going after this week. But if you have to go after wide receiver, number one's Juju. Makes me want to throw up. He's he's awful. Like, he's a horrible wide receiver at this point in his career. But he knows the system, and Mahomes trusts him to a degree. Like, Mahomes obviously has seen all the terrible drops he's had, even just in Kansas City. He knows that he's super slow. He's not really doing anything, but he knows the system. He knows where to be, and that's actually very important for the Kansas City offense. It's not just about how good of a wide receiver are you. It's, can you get to the right spots? Can you know what you're supposed to do? He knows that, so he's going to be on the field. He's going to take these short area targets. I still think they trade for a wide receiver. I just can't see it being a long-term play, but for now, while they don't have another wide receiver, honestly, you could probably use Juju in the flex. Michael Wilson, we had Marvin Harrison Jr. suffer concussion. That's almost a just guarantee. It's almost a guarantee that the next week you're going to miss. So Marvin Harrison Jr. probably not going to play this week. It's versus the Chargers, so not like a great matchup. But I've been saying for like a month now, Michael Wilson's better than most people think. He's always an option on free agency. If he's still out there, he's probably going to be a flex play this weekend, so you can definitely go after him. Romeo Doubs. I don't think Wicks is going to miss much time, if any time, but he could, and that would obviously open things up for Doubs. Nothing really happened this weekend. I mean, he scores with 2 touchdowns. There's only on 4 receptions. Obviously, that ratio is going to drop. Nothing happened this weekend to change my outlook on him. He's still going to run like the most routes of any wide receiver on this team. It's a team that throws the ball a ton, so he's going to run into these games where he has multiple touchdowns, where he has, a spike to 5, 6, 7 receptions. But it's going to be more matchup based. Fortunately for him, 2 of the next 3 weeks are at Jacksonville and versus Detroit. So he's going to have 2 really good spots in the next 3 weeks for you to stream there. Xavier Legette, another one where nothing crazy happened this season. Nothing changed my outlook on Legette. Thielen still return at some point. But it would also be weird if, like, they brought Thielen back from his injury and they're like, all right, time to bench Legette. Like, Legette, they invested a lot in. He's their young prospect. They're not going anywhere this season. So if you've got, the rookie wide receiver playing, 3/4 of snaps, 4/5 of snaps, second half of the year, athletic wide receiver, competent enough offense that could get better with Jonathan Brooks returning soon. I don't think this is any sort of must add, but I could definitely see him having like a minor breakout in the second half of the season. Demario Douglas, as I've said before, wasn't like incredible on Sunday, but he was good enough. He's clearly an upgrade over Jacoby Brissett. Douglas going to play 2/3, maybe up to 3/4 of the snaps, depending on game script, but usually like 2/3 of the snaps. 9 targets in back-to-back weeks. Seems like he's got a good connection with Drake May because he is a good wide receiver. I still like Polk long term, but it's seeming like the long term that I thought was going to happen maybe in the second half of his rookie year might be his sophomore season. He's separating to a degree, but it's just not. He needs to play a little bit better. Hyperly inefficient, basically. Like, he's getting some targets, but he's not doing anything with them. Douglas is just the guy you want in the second half of the season. Again, Polk, long-term play. It would not shock me at all if it's week 12, 13, 14, he really starts to get going. But at this point, I think Douglas is the one you want in New England. And then it's just flyers. Vele, Tipton, Means, that's Mason Tipton, Bub Means on the Saints. Options for you. None of them are must-adds, but when they let Vele play, he plays well. Like, he is a pretty good player. I don't know why they're not letting him play as much. 8 receptions for 39 yards in week 1. Finally gets to play again this next week. 4 receptions for 78 yards. So when they let him play, he does well. We'll see if they let him play moving forward. And then potential for both Olave and Shaheed to be out on Thursday night. I don't think Tipton, Means are going to project amazingly. We'll see as soon as this video ends and I, edit it and I post it. I'm going to work on the next week ranking, so we will see. But I think there's upside there. And like, if you lost one of them and you're like, wow, Nick, like all these wide receivers you talked about, none of them are actually available. I think these 3 are kind of who you could fill that role with, but you would probably just put, Tipton and Means. That would just be the obvious ones because Olave's not going to play. He had the concussion. But there's a chance that, like they said, it's a significant knee injury for Shaheed, but there's no real actual reporting on it. If it's bad, you're going to have Tipton, who had a great camp, and then Means, who's kind of like a decent fill-in option, pretty athletic, can definitely get downfield. You're going to have these 2 playing virtually every snap on a team that has a pretty decent scheme this season. They could do well. So they would be the ones where if you had one of these 2, you just add their replacement instead of trying to add someone who has nothing to do with the team. Aside from that, there really truly is just not much. Please claim Sam Darnold if he was dropped for some reason, and you didn't for some reason do it last week. But he's an incredible option rest of the season, like a top 7 quarterback rest of the season. Only other streaming option I'm really seeing is Drake May at the Jaguars. Again, the Jaguars are a defense that we're attacking every single week this season. They're a joke. They're terrible. This is a spot where we could see Drake May throw for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and add 40 rushing yards. Like, he is more mobile than people think, so he's absolutely an option to go after. For streaming defense, I'm only seeing 2 options. We're always streaming the defense against the Titans and the Browns. This week, it is the Bills versus the Browns. The Bills were actually available in like a lot more leagues than I thought. It was only like half the league. I thought the Bills were just rostered more than they were. But Bills are an option, probably the number 1 option versus the Titans. And then Bengals versus the Browns. Bengals do not have a good defense at all, so don't be shocked if they don't do anything, but it's versus the Browns. That is an incredible sack spot. That is an incredible spot for like interceptions, turnovers, things like that, especially because Bengals are going to put up points. They're at home. Browns defense is good, but they're going to score points, and so they're going to force the Browns to throw it. Definitely a good option there. And then finally, the only tight end option I'm really seeing is Cade Otton once again. But I mention him every week, and there's nothing that happened this week that makes me change my outlook on him. And thus, if you haven't been going after him before, there's nothing that should make you now all of a sudden want to go after him. Sure, he scores a touchdown, but that's just randomness. It would really just be, do you have buys? Do you have injuries? Cade Otton's going to be out there most plays, not going to have a high target share, but he has a large share of the snaps on a team that is going to score points, so he could always score a touchdown. He could always just run into a game where he has 4, 5, 6 receptions. It is worth going after him if you need someone to stream. So that's how waivers are looking this week. I'll have the weekly and rest of season rankings up as soon as possible. Again, I lost yesterday due to travel, so I'm running a little bit behind this week, but I'll do my best to get those up today. But TBD, if it's possible to get it up before you guys do your waivers. I'm going to do, again, my best to get them up tonight. Make sure you like the video if you watch this far. Make sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel, but I'll catch you all on the next one.